Good evening, everyone. MFC-VIT is here again with another spectacular event, this time focusing on Quality Week on the interface quality control. I, Manya Garg, core committee member of MFC-VIT, will be taking up the session. So, let's get started. First, we'll understand what is interface testing. Whenever an application or a software or a website is developed, then there are several components of it. I guess my screen isn't visible. I'll just reshare it again. Mm. Good evening, everyone. MFC-VIT is back with another event, and this time its focuses on Quality Week, and topic is interface quality control. I, Manya Garg, will be taking up the session, so let's get started. First, we'll understand that what is interface testing. Whenever an application or a software or a website is developed, then there are several components of it. And these components, they can be server, database, etc. So the connection which integrates and facilitates the communication between these components is termed as an interface. And if we talk in more simpler terms, then interface is a software comprising of a set of commands and messages, etc. Now, for a computer, an interface can be a API, web service, and the communication between the different components of a software or application can affect the overall performance, and hence this communication, that is, the interface also needs to be tested and verified. So, we just looked at how important is interface testing. So, we'll dive deep into it. Now, the testing that is done to verify the interface functionality, it is called the interface testing. Now, to understand it, we can divide it into three parts. First, the interface analysis, then the interface design, and then the interface development. Now, first we do application analysis or the business analysis, and then we look into the requirements of the interface, then the interface specification, and then finally we come on to the interface testing part. Now, the two common components of interface testing include web server and application server interface, or database server and application server interface. Now, when and why should we test an interface? We'll understand that why is it important that interface testing is so much important. First, it helps to check if the screen execution is proper. Yeah, so now we look on to the two components of interface testing, and they include web server and application server interface and database server and application server interface. Now, when and why should we test an interface? It's basically to check if the server execution is proper or error handling is done properly and appropriate error messages are shown for queries made by the application or software. Then, to check the result when a connection to the server is reset, or to check the security aspect when the components communicate within themselves, and lastly, to check the impact of network failure on the communication between the components. Now, there are three phases of interface testing. The first one is configuration and development. When the interface is configured and once the development start, the configuration need to be verified as per the requirement. Now, once the configuration or the development is done, then the second phase is that of validation. Now, when the development is completed, the interface needs to be validated and verified. This can be done as a part of unit testing also. Then after that, the third phase is maintenance. Now, once the whole software is ready and it's ready to work, Then the interface, it needs to be monitored for its performance and any new issues introduced due to the changes made or deteriorating performance. Now there are several types of interface testing. There are several types of interface testing. The first one is unit testing. Now, testing the functionality of each individual operation in a function. Then comes the functional testing, that is, to test the functionality of broader scenarios involving test case creation, validation, regression, etc. Then comes load testing, that is, validating the performance under load, mostly by using functional test cases. Then we have security testing, that is to test the security mechanism, and it includes penetration testing as well as validating access control, encryption, etc. Then we have runtime error detection, that is monitoring an application for problems like runtime, race, resource leak, etc. Workflow testing, this is done to ensure if the interface engine handles your workflow as expected. Then comes individual systems. Now, this testing is done to verify the individuality of each system, like the billing system and the inventory management system. They should be able to operate individually. Now comes the strategy or the approach for interface testing. So, just like any other testing, interface testing is equally important as it ensures seamless functioning and performance, etc., of various data driven applications and systems by verifying the communication between the database, networks, and systems. Now, interface testing, it becomes more important when we verify the application's dependencies with other apps. Now, few steps that we can ensure that interface testing to be successful. So if we want that the interface testing, like it should be a success, then there are several steps that we need to follow. The first one being to define your requirement. Now, before creating the interface test, it is very essential to understand the application, and hence try to find answers to questions like what is the purpose of the interface, what is the workflow of the system or application, and what are the functions and features of the interface. Defining all such answers, they will actually help us to understand the requirement. So before creating the interface test, we need to understand that what are the functions and features of the interface, and defining all such answers, they will help us to understand the requirement and find out the tricky points of the application, and then create the test cases accordingly. Often QAs miss the later, and on this leads to confusion about the requirement or incorrect testing. Then the second point is to like expected output. Like now we know and understand the requirement very well, it is time to finalize the output that we'll be expecting from the test. Not just a pass or a fail, it can be some data, call to another API, etc. So it can not only be tricky but also risky to measure the outcome of the expected result, and hence now what we need to do is to find out what could be the outcome by discussing it with the developers. So it's very important that whatever we do, we discuss it with the developers, because it can be sometimes tricky or risky. Then we need to start small. Like with interface testing, we can't directly move on with creating big test cases. Creating small test cases or calls is relatively simple. At at least in small functions, create small test code and verify if the output is as expected or not. Then we should try automating. Like writing codes for testing and interface, it can be very boring. You'll not only be spending time in writing the code, but along with this, you'll also have to spend time to understand the format, style, the coding language that is used for development, and then as icing on the cake, you will have to make sure that your code isn't creating a problem to the app or system code. Hence, it is better to research and find some automation tools which will save your day. It will be much easier and a time saving process too. Then define the start and stop points. Like before starting the execution of a test, we always decide the start, that is the entry, and the stop, exit point of the test, as well as we decide how the entire testing process will start and end. Similarly, we need to measure the performance level of the interface testing as well. So these were the few steps that we need to ensure that our interface testing is going to be successful. Now we come on to certain checklists for interface testing. We look onto them one by one. So 4xx and 5xx errors should be included in the test because they will help you to verify the server side and the client side error handling. Ideally, an appropriate message should be shown rather than a code error. Then, secondly, validation of the user using the HTTP authentication. Then, verify all the methods that are used in the API or web services like GET, PUT, POST, etc. Verify the conversion from JSON format to XML format and vice versa. Verify whether the bulk operations on an interface are fetching the expected results. Then verify if the time zone of the API is matching the specification of the time zone of a geographical area. Verify if unauthorized access to the interface leads to a proper error message. Then we need to verify if the connection interruptions are handled properly. And lastly, we need to verify that if some components are removed from the application, then the interface is not interacting with these components anymore, etc. So all these things we need to verify, and these forms certain checklists for our interface testing. Now, what can be the best tools for interface testing? So, as companies, they are moving towards DevOps, continuous integration, and continuous deployment. Testing feedback needs to be quicker than ever. Before we actually get ready to ship your application, you need to make sure that the interfaces are well tested. Manually testing the interface, it can be very tedious, complicated, and a time consuming process too. So the best method to perform interface testing is to use automation and include the interface testing in your automation plan. Then we'll be discussing about certain tools for interface testing. Now, the first one being REST assured. So, like for people who are working with Java, REST assured is the most preferable tool, and in fact, it's the best tool for API testing with Java because verifying REST web services in Java, it is quite difficult, and it is designed for testing purposes, and hence it can easily integrate with any Java based framework. It has a lot of cooked in functionalities, and hence you won't need to code things from the beginning. This tool integrates well with the Serenity framework, and you can generate awesome test reports. Then comes the SOAP UI. If your team is doing only API testing, SOAP UI, it can be a great choice. It is a complete functional testing tool devoted to API testing. It also supports data-driven testing where the data can be passed in CSV or a Excel format. It also has a paid version called SOAP UI Pro, which offers even better and improved features for web service testing. So if you are a beginner, you can just simply use SOAP UI. But if you really want to excel, then you can use its premium version, that is SOAP UI Pro. And if you want to add extra code for some specific workflow or functionality, use Groovy for your scripting. You can also create a global variable setting and use all those variables in your test rather than initializing individually for each test. Then looking on to more tools, Jmeter and Fiddler are another tools that we can use for interface testing. Now Jmeter, it's widely used for load testing and it can be used for interface testing too. JMeter has a record and playback support and it generates HTML reports which are easy to read and understand. As JMeter is compatible with CSV files, this allows you to create unique parameters for testing. It is easily integrable with Jenkins so that your test it can be included in the CI. And if you want to use the same tool for an interface and load testing, then JMeter will be a worthy choice. Then, other than this, you can also go for Fiddler. Fiddler helps you to check and use again the HTTP request. It has many features that help you to debug the website issues with its extensions, and you can do much more. It is also a good tool for security testing as it can be configured to decrypt the encrypted request and then modify the request for testing purposes. One of the Fiddler's extensions is API test extension, and this helps to verify the web behavior of an interface. For more intense interface testing, you can try using the Fiddler Core Net library to create your interface testing infrastructure. So these were some of the tools that we looked, uh, and these are very good tools that we can use for our interface testing. So with this, we come on to the conclusion that interface testing is a very important part of testing for large scale application and it is a must to do it. Even the applications where CIs is regularly followed, it becomes important to perform interface testing. Interface testing it is quite tricky and not straightforward, and hence a proper strategy is designed to perform this testing. Also, remember to take the inputs from the development team as they understand the code better. The best and simplest way to perform this testing is to automate and integrate the testing suite in the CI so that a lot of time will be saved and the results will be achieved at a faster pace. So, uh, this was all. Uh, Thank you very much. So, if we look on from the starting that what all we covered in this session, then first we looked on that what is interface testing. Then we looked on some of the reasons that why and when should we test an interface. Then we covered the types of interface testing and the strategy or the approach for interface testing, and few steps that ensure interface testing to be successful. We discussed five of the points that can actually be ensured that our interface testing is successful, and then the checklist for interface testing. Then we looked on to the best tools for interface testing and we discussed four of them that we can use if we want to test our interfaces. So that was it for today's session. Thank you so much and we'll see you in our next session. Bye.